Welcome to the RotoWire Fantasy Baseball Podcast, brought to you by Underdog Fantasy and Fantrax. My guest today is the legend Steve Gardner from USA Today, who commissions the leagues of alternative baseball reality, of which we were both obviously participating in this past weekend. Steve, thanks so much for joining me.
You're so welcome, and pleasure to be here and talk about LABR and everything else. I think I'm still on kind of a high from the entire weekend. It was just a great time with everybody, seeing everybody, and getting back to live drafting. That it's still giving me a real good feeling.
Yeah, I agree. It was just it was such a kind of a positive atmosphere. Everyone was having fun. Everyone was catching up and telling stories and sharing how the personal lives are going. Lots of good fantasy baseball conversations as well. So that was definitely a weekend to remember. How much? I mean, you mentioned just kind of getting to see everybody. Just how much fun was it for you to finally get back to these auctions, being in person, everyone being in the same room? Were there any sort of memories or moments that really stand out that as you look back?
Well, obviously, having not done this since the 2020 season and having to do all of our LABR drafts online, it was great to just get back in the room, get used to, having an auctioneer, a little bit of personality, spilling out from everyone. And I think we all like to, think back on things we could have done differently, things that worked, things that didn't work. And when you talk about moments or anything like that, I think anytime you're in a bidding war with somebody, I remember I was bidding on Shohei Ohtani pretty early in the AL draft. And Colton and the Wolfman were going up, and I had it like 31. And I was like, I can't let them have it for that. And so I bid a little bit more, and I wasn't even thinking about having Ohtani on my roster. But if they were going to get him for that kind of price, I can't let that happen. So some of the gamesmanship that you see in the room, that was really fun to get back to.
Yeah, absolutely. I had a similar experience with Anthony Rizzo and Ian Khan. I had zero plans on getting Rizzo in that auction, but I couldn't let Ian get him for 16. So I got stuck with him at 17, but I still thought that was a good value.
Yeah.
I was laughing on several occasions. You were in bid offs with Brett Sayre, who I was sitting next to, and it was kind of a game of chicken between you two on a few of those guys.
Indeed, and we went back and forth. It was all in the same part of the draft too. I know Yordan Alvarez was the guy that we first sparred on, I think, in that regard. And I pushed him up a little bit, maybe out of his comfort zone. But I think he ended up getting Alvarez for 35 or something like that. And then coming back around, I had a couple of guys, Eloy Jimenez, he was pushing me on, a couple other guys. Maybe he was in on Byron Buxton as well. But yeah, we had a little back and forth, and he got a couple of those guys and I got a couple of them. And it seems like, at every turn at that point in the draft, we were fighting over the same guys, and that was fun too.
So Glenn Colton made a point in our sort of Q&A the next morning about how some people in the room have tells when they're bidding, but he said Steve doesn't have any tells. Do you kind of just, do you think you got a good poker face? Is it because you're in on most players? What do you how do you explain that?
I don't know. Maybe it's my face for radio or something, but I think what it is in my strategy or the way that I play the game, I like to have a lot of variety and change things up. So I'm never, throwing out a guy at the same price. Never, really intensely bidding all the time, or waiting until, it's going once, going twice. I think that's kind of, I just like to vary things up, and I like to keep things moving as well. So maybe that's part of it. Although it's funny, I was talking with some of the attendees there who were at the First Pitch Florida conference, and they were saying, well, what are your do you do something, you do things during the draft? And we were talking a little bit, and they were kind of giving me some information. And, like when think I have a good team, or when I think things are going well, some of my habits. So maybe I'll keep those to myself. But I think everybody has their own little quirks. And maybe for me, it's just trying to do things at least differently every time around.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And maybe Glenn maybe he has a tell on you and he wants you to think he doesn't have a tell on you.
That could very well be. After all these years drafting with those guys, it would not surprise me one bit.
So I thought Austin Riley for 30 was a really good buy in the NL auction. There were a lot of that was to Ron Chandler. I thought there were maybe more good buys or value buys, in my opinion, on the NL side than the AL side. That might just be because I wasn't in the room, and it's a lot easier to just say, oh, I would have gotten the extra dollar there. And then I also thought your Tyler Mahle for $8 was the steal of the AL, and that really kind of came down to hit just when he got nominated. He got nominated pretty late. Did you have any buys that really stood out to you as some of the better values from either the AL or the NL auction?
Well, I think you hit it on the NL. There are a lot of really, high level tier 1, tier 2 starting pitchers. And so, you're going to, if you're patient, probably get a decent price on some of those. I mean, I think we had like 4 or 5 of them were over 30, but then there were 9 or so that were still 20 to 30, in that range. So you could save a couple of dollars and get you, a similar quality pitcher. Let me take a look real fast and just check those prices. I mean, you've got Yu Darvish was 24, Zach Wheeler was 24, Max Fried was 25, Zach Gallen 22. So if you're playing in that sort of space, and I went Max Scherzer was my ace at 30. But if you waited a little bit longer, I think you had a chance to get some decent buys there. For me in the NL, I think Bryce Harper. I don't know. I think he's one of those potential game-changing type picks this year in NL only drafts because he's only going to be available for half of the season, we think at this point, which leaves you some room to fill that spot in. You can use at any position because he's going to be utility only. So you could possibly get some decent, fillers off the waiver wire, off your reserves. And if he comes back earlier, maybe if he's a couple of weeks earlier and comes back in June rather than July, then that value starts getting even better. So at $14, I thought that was pretty good. And I like my Jesse Winker too, moving from the American League back to the National League in a really good hitter's park in Milwaukee. He was $14 as well. So those were the ones I kind of liked in the NL. And as you mentioned, Mahle in the AL. I kind of like Felix Bautista at 15, considering the way that closers went. And I'm hoping really hard that Brandon Belt is going to thrive there in Toronto. He's going to be healthy. And if so, getting him for $5 in an AL only league could be huge for me.
Yeah, the Harper one, there was some chatter. We had some kind of injury discussions at First Pitch Florida, and I know a couple people were suggesting he might even be back in June. Definitely kind of guesswork there, but getting a player who is arguably a top 5 player in the NL when he's healthy for 14, and then in this league you get to IL him and then fab someone else to slot in there.
Yeah, and the fact too, I mean, we saw when he came back in the playoffs last year from the injury how really good he can be. And boy, if I can get that when he comes off the injured list this year, it'll be very nice for my team.
Were there any other buys from other managers that you kind of look back on? I know you've been writing up some summaries on the two auctions and the mixed league one. Are there any other ones from other managers that really sort of stand out to you as sort of how did we let this guy go for this price?
Yeah, there were a handful. I thought, I mean, Jonathan India is another guy that I really like. He went for, what did he go for?
14.
14. Yeah, I think he could be really good this season and get back to the form, his rookie of the year form. Some of the other picks, there's so many. I mean, the thing is that this room is so sharp. I mean, everybody is on the ball. Everybody's done their homework. And so it's really hard unless you're getting some of those injury guys. Jacob deGrom went for 23 because of injury questions. That could be really great for Frank Stanfield in the AL because compared to some of the others in the AL, that's a fantastic bargain. Dylan Cease went for 24 and Bieber went for 25, Gossman 25. DeGrom can be certainly better than any of those guys, significantly better if he's healthy and can stay healthy. So really, I think if you're willing to take a shot here and there on a guy who's got a little risk, you're doing okay. But otherwise, unless you're waiting until late and you happen to have the hammer to pluck off some of those guys and bid $7 when other people only have $6, it's tough to find bargains in this league.
Yeah, that was Jesse Roach in the AL that got DeGrom at 23.
Right. That's right. Jesse did.
I look back. I mean, this was Jesse's first time in the league. He was actually the person that when I was filling out the questionnaire for you about like which team thought did the best. I thought Jesse did really well for a rookie. Obviously, DeGrom. He also got Tyler Glass now for 11, taking on a lot of risk there. But you could see, you're kind of trying to get those high end outcomes. You could see how it could all come together for him.
Yep, I did the same with Lance McCullers Jr. too. Just take a shot with some of those guys, and possibly they'll get healthy and be good. It wasn't. I think last year injury guys were not a great risk. If they were supposed to be coming back, in the first month or 2 or 3, but we still keep going back to that well.
So I thought Eno Saris brought up a great point that next morning. He was discussing spending $40 for Jose Ramirez, and he's been playing in this league for over a decade. He said that's the first time he's ever spent $40 on a player. But he also made the point that we can all run our sort of valuations, our auction calculators, but at least for him, historically, it seemed like the very best players sort of get a $3 to $5 bump on top of your valuation for them in the actual auction. You didn't necessarily sort of shop in that section of the market. Marcus Semien for 29 was your most expensive in the AL. Max Scherzer for 30 was your most expensive in the NL. Do you typically get priced out on those types of players that we consider, no doubt mixed league first rounders?
Most of the time, yes. And it's partly because I don't dislike shopping in the high rent district, but what it does is, the after effects and the ripple effects when you get into the late stages of the draft to where you don't have a whole lot of money to spend and there are a bunch of $1 players left over. I don't like, fishing in that pool. So what I try and do is maybe go and get those second tier players, get a couple of them even. And then I have some left over to where my last guys that I get on my roster are $3 and $4 guys instead of $1 or $2 guys. Or if they are $1 or $2 guys, they're guys that I want and I nominate and I get for that, price. And if people go an extra dollar on me, I'm okay with letting them go for there. So I think that's one of the reasons why I don't really go all out for those $40 players and $38 players and guys like that, just because of what it does down the road to the rest of your draft.
Yeah, and Eno won last year by a very wide margin, and I believe he spent up for Kyle Tucker last year. Didn't have to go to 40 on Tucker last year, but he probably looks back on that as a successful build, and
and the replacement value, again, if you lose one of those guys, it's so hard to get somebody to take the place and provide you anywhere close to the stats that you're looking to get. So I think that's why generally when I'm successful, I play, in that middle area, and it's best for me.
And we got a comment here in the chat from Brian Murray, who says in the AL it is worth spending big on third base, sort of citing the drop off in terms of replacement value there.
Absolutely. And, Eno had, if you're going to spend up, especially in the AL, get a guy at a fairly scarce position, get a guy who hits home runs, and a guy who steals bases. I mean, you have that little triple play. That's worth the extra bump. So it makes a lot of sense when you look at it that way.
Yeah, and you and I spent a decent amount at third base. You got Eugenio Suarez for 15. I got Alex Bregman for 24. But yeah, I mean, there's some teams are going into the season with Gio Urshela or Jace Peterson or Josh Donaldson.
Moncada, down in that area.
Yeah, so it does fall off in the AL. Okay, we're gonna head to a quick message from our sponsors, and then Steve and I will be back to talk about the two LABR leagues, NL only and AL only, which I got to witness this past weekend. The fantasy baseball season is underway, and there's no better place to play than Underdog Fantasy, the easiest place to play fantasy baseball. Right now, Underdog has MLB best ball tournaments live, including the Dinger, which has $500K in total prizes. In best ball, all you do is join a contest, draft your team, and that's it. There are no waivers, no trades, and no in-season management. Draft 20 rounds of players and get the best cumulative scores in your starting lineup. 3 pitchers, 3 infielders, 3 outfielders, and 1 flex each week of the regular season. Getting started is simple. Go to UnderdogFantasy.com, sign up with the promo code RWMLB, and not only will Underdog double your initial deposit up to $100, but you'll also get 6 months of our RotoWire subscription for free. Again, that's Underdog Fantasy, promo code RWMLB. Draft your 100K Dinger team today. Fantrax is the most customizable fantasy platform in the industry, offering the greatest fantasy experience for your dynasty, keeper, redraft, and best ball leagues. If you are on another site and you want to move your league to Fantrax, that's easy. You can customize your league settings. They've got the best player pool in the industry, all the minor leaguers. They've got guys who aren't even in professional baseball yet. They've got guys from overseas in the player pool if you're doing an open universe dynasty league. It's also the best site, I think, to sort statistically. You can use advanced statistics to sort for free agents. That's where we have the Highlander Dynasty Invitational. I play in several other dynasty leagues on Fantrax, so I really can't recommend it highly enough. Sign up for free today and be entered to win an official MLB jersey, a signed jersey from Vladimir Guerrero Jr. Simply go to fantrax.com/RotoWire and sign up today. That's fantrax.com/RotoWire. Fantrax, the home of fantasy sports. Okay, Steve, we're back. Someone in my like AL LABR recap article commented that it seemed like I was sort of too much of a slave to my pre-draft values, and that I might not compete as a result of it. There were some managers who openly admitted to kind of going over their price on a player here and there to make sure that they got their guy. Maybe going into the auction with the strategy of getting a specific player. That's something I did last year, and I kind of, I wanted to try to actually be a slave to my pre-draft values this year and sort of see how it went. You'll have players like Derek Carty and Ariel Cohen who will tell you generally shouldn't spend more than you have a player valued at. But where do you sort of fall in that kind of line of thinking in terms of being rigid versus being more flexible in auction?
Yeah, I think I'm way more flexible than maybe just about anybody in LABR, just because I don't do my own statistical projections. I kind of take a look at the league. I do rankings, but I look at how the players are in comparison to each other in terms of overall value and category value, and I just sort of have them there, and I have kind of guide values, but I don't think we can be so precise. I think that's one of the things when people look at anybody's projections, it doesn't matter who it is. You look at a projection for a particular player or several players and say, and we had a session at First Pitch about different kinds of projections and which players are hard to project and which players maybe are a little easier. I look at those and say, we can't get as close as we want to. We can't get anywhere near the actual value that they're going to have. So let's look at these players in relation to the other players. And once you start getting the players off the board and you see who's available, the values change. And it's really hard to, if you're sticking to these values that you have brought into the draft and they're changing as the draft is going on, then you're going to miss something. And that's the way I look at it. I have a certain amount that I plan to spend on a position grouping, like first base, third base, corner infielder, or for my outfield, based on kind of the depth of the league and what I see are the strong points and the weak points of the player pool. But once you get going, you've got to be able to adjust. And so if somebody is out there that I feel like my team really needs, I have no problem going $3, $4, $5 over what I have projected for them to start the draft. So I think that's one of the things, especially with scarce categories like steals, like saves, things like that. Catcher situation. I mean, the catchers this year, the catching pool is a lot deeper, it seems like, than it's ever been. And as a result, the prices on those guys were a lot higher than I thought they would be, just because people wanted to get good catchers and they were willing to pay up for them. So yeah, I feel like you have to be flexible. And if you stick to those numbers, you run the risk of maybe missing out on opportunities where you could have, if you're saving money on some of the later guys, you could have used that money earlier to get players that you really need more than the one you ended up with.
Yeah, I want to touch on a couple things you said there. Yeah, I definitely felt, and this is probably the case every year, but I felt at least in the AL auction that we were both in, anyone, it seemed like almost anyone who had a chance to steal 15 plus bases, no matter how bad of a hitter they were, was getting really priced up. And I blame Larry Schechter for about half of that. It seemed like he was in on every single guy who was going to steal bases.
Yeah, I felt the exact same way. And as a result, I mean, I got Marcus Semien early and figured, yeah, I'll be in good shape with him because he'll give me power, he'll steal some bases. And then I felt like everybody was just getting pushed up and up and up and up. I mean, Cedric Mullins was at 28. Esteury Ruiz was 15. All those guys that maybe you wouldn't necessarily, although I like Mullins too, but further down, I ended up having to jump in and get Adalberto Mondesi, or else Semien might have been the only guy that I had that would get double-digit steals. So, and Mondesi's hurt, and who knows what he's going to do when he comes back or when he's going to come back. But at least the threat of him being able to run and steal bases, I felt like I needed that. And I pretty much just passed on all those guys and figured I'll get a roster that's stronger elsewhere because we can trade. Maybe if I need to, I'll look for steals, on the trade market later on in the season.
Yeah, I'm kind of in a similar boat as you. I actually ended up feeling fortunate to get Akil Baddoo for 6 in the AL. But other than Baddoo and maybe Waters, maybe Nick Gordon. I'm really relying on Oswald Peraza to get to 20 steals, and Jose Altuve I could really use to get to 10 steals, and be nice if Vlad chipped in some. But the point about trading is key here, because that is a category, kind of like with saves, where whoever is leading that category is going to look at their standings in July or August and kind of decide that they could probably flip some speed or some saves for help elsewhere. So
yeah, I think with the new rules this year, we really have no idea how much it's going to increase stolen bases and what part of the player pool will benefit the most. I tend to think that maybe the upper level guys might steal 10-15% more, but the bulk of the extra steals might come in those 10 to 20 steal players. So perhaps it may be easier if steals are more prevalent during the season, and we have pretty good indication that they will be. It may be easier to buy steals or trade for steals during the season, because the people that made a point of getting guys who will run are going to have a lot more extra, and possibly we can leverage that, you and I can, later on in the season to our advantage.
Well, we might be competing, and we might be being positioned against each other in trade talks.
If we're not bidding against each other in the room on these guys, then we'll be negotiating and trade deals against each other, perhaps.
So we mentioned third base, in kind of in passing, in terms of being a shallow position in the AL. Were there any other positions that kind of stood out to you since you're in both auctions, where you were sort of like, oh, it really falls off a cliff at this spot in the American League or in the NL? I definitely want to make sure I get kind of one of these top 5 or 6 guys at this position. Were there any positions like that?
What was interesting to me is that, especially in the NL, I mean, you see some definite tier breaks in those. You've got a top 3 or 4 at a position. That was one of the things when I was doing my analysis and recap of the way that draft went. I mean, you've got, for instance, JT Realmuto, Will Smith, and Wilson Contreras were all 23 or above. Then you've got a gap until Tyler Stevenson and William Contreras and Travis d'Arnaud and Keibert Ruiz were all 13 to 15. So you have to figure out, which area, which tier you're going to play in. Same sort of thing, top 4 first basemen, Freddie Freeman, Paul Goldschmidt, Pete Alonso, and Matt Olson, all 30 and above in NL LABR. The next highest was Rhys Hoskins at 20. So you can do that. It seemed like at every position, there was a clump of players at the top, and sometimes a second clump under that, to where you had to sort of make your choice and decide, do I want an upper tier first baseman? And if I do, is that going to keep me from getting a guy that I want at second base? So check that out. I wonder if that's going to be something that we'll see consistently. I don't think that it was something that'll be unique to LABR in the NL this season. So that was something that really jumped out at me. And then, I talked a little bit about the wealth of really good starting pitchers in the National League. I don't think there are that many in the American League. And we didn't see as many 20 plus dollar pitchers. We certainly didn't see 30 plus. Only Garrett Cole went for 30 or more in the AL. So you've got to be a little bit more judicious in the AL if you're going to look for that ace starting pitcher.
Yeah, and you brought up catchers. This is only my second year in the league, but I seem to remember catchers. I think Sal Perez maybe went for like 21 last year as the most expensive guy or something like that. It seemed like, do you think it's just because like the top end talent, there are more kind of guys that people really feel deserve a hefty price, or is it maybe a changing kind of mindset among the people in the leagues in terms of how valuable having a good catcher is? Like, did you notice it being kind of different this year compared to past years?
Yeah, I did. And I think really the greater factor, more so than any change in philosophy or the new people that we had in the NL, it's just the catching pool has gotten so much better. I mean, you look at Adley Rutschman when he came up and what a difference maker he was last year. You've got MJ Melendez, who came up and made an impact himself and, is playing in the outfield. There are a couple of guys that do have kind of that dual position eligibility. Tyler Stevenson was one of the guys that I got in the NL draft. And I was, I try not to target players specifically, but he was one of the guys that I felt really has a chance to break through this year because he's not going to catch every day. He's going to play a lot of first base. And David Bell said that he wanted to do it that way to give him a break behind the plate because he lost a lot of time due to a concussion and a collision, last year. And he was one of their best hitters before that. So I think William Contreras coming up, playing, DH. And I think, too, you add the DH to the National League, and a lot of those teams have kind of looked at the strategy of giving your catcher a break, especially a good hitting catcher, and just having him DH so that he's a little bit fresher, can last the season. Because you saw what happened when Sal Perez had that season a couple of years ago with his 48 home runs. I mean, he was playing every day, but he wasn't every day behind the plate. He was DHing a lot. So I think that's one of the things that, a couple of the young prospects even now, really good catching prospects, promising catching prospects. So you add those guys to the player pool. And now that catcher, especially in 2-catcher leagues, that second catcher doesn't have to be a dead spot that you just churn through during the season. You can actually get some guys that can be productive, in both of those catcher positions.
Yeah, you had, and you got Dalton Varsho, who has emerged as a top 2 or 3 catcher, and he's going to be playing every day in the outfield. And Greg Ambrosius and Sean Childs got Varsho and Rutschman for a total of 46.
Yeah.
And then I also thought there were, kind of looking back on the NL, and I was in there for most of the auction. I really, I don't have Francisco Alvarez anywhere, but I really thought Greg and Sean getting Francisco Alvarez for $1 was a really nice buy in the NL. I know he's UT only, and they also got Endy Rodriguez, another catching prospect, but man, that just seemed like a really good value in an NL only, getting Francisco Alvarez for $1.
He came out really, I think, in the first round. Somebody nominated him. In fact, they may have nominated him.
Right? Yeah.
I can look back, but I think they did.
Well,
and
yeah.
It's like the room was kind of stunned, and I think that's one of the great things about doing these live auctions is you never know what's going to happen, and the way that people react. We didn't want to fill up our UT spot. Shohei Ohtani hadn't come out yet. And although he can move between utility and pitcher, which is another great thing that why I was bidding on him. But those UT only guys in the American League, you want to keep your options open. And that was a smart move by them. I don't know that necessarily they were aware of Alvarez's
the UT only part.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, that's they've corrected themselves, didn't seem to miss a beat and didn't worry about it going forward.
Well, either way, yeah, it definitely worked out. I think you're right. Probably, everyone else knew that he was UT only, and that is not something you're necessarily looking to do, is like first 10 minutes of an auction, fill your UT spot. So that played to their advantage, I think.
Yep. And you look at how many people, and again, that was in the NL, not the AL, but just in general, people don't want to fill up their UT spot because there are opportunities. You never know what's going to happen later in the draft. And there are a handful of guys that are pretty decent, in terms of UT onlys. The JD Martinez's and the guys, Nelson Cruz and Matt Carpenter in San Diego, Shea Langoliers, also UT only. So, and I think one of the smart things too in LABR, especially with catchers, you only need 5 appearances at a position to gain eligibility. So that kind of opens the door for, Alvarez is going to be pretty quickly, assuming that he does see time behind the plate and he's there from opening day, going to gain that catcher eligibility pretty quick. So that's also something to keep in mind. Know your rules.
Right. And since they took Endy Rodriguez, they will, they'll be able to shuttle him down to the minors once he gets sent down.
Exactly.
And then at that kind of a week later, they'll be able to slot Alvarez into the catcher spot. So you mentioned like the new blood in the league. I think there were 4 first-time LABR participants in the AL and NL side of things, and then there were also some veteran participants who were joining the NL league. And it might have been you. I think someone commented when we were kind of recapping the NL auction that next morning that it's sort of the bidding sort of seemed just more normal than everyone was sort of used to, because nobody was kind of trying these outside the box strategies, or nobody was kind of doing just kind of weird tendencies that really kind of stick with you and you sort of remember, oh, this guy always does it like this. Are there any sort of memorable outside the box strategies or tendencies from managers that you can kind of recall from the long history of LABR that really kind of stand out to you?
Oh, sure. We were talking, in fact, after the draft on Saturday night about, hey, remember when some of the old timers were sitting around the table and talking about the famous Larry Labadini $9 pitching staff, where he just went all in on the hitting and threw away the pitching. It didn't work, but he did win a LABR title, I think maybe the next year, with a modified version of that. So yeah, I think some of the things, strategies that we know now kind of evolved out of LABR. Ron Chandler, who was back, you talk about the newcomers. Ron Chandler came back after being out last year. He was in the mixed LABR back in 2020, and then took some time off and was pretty much going to call it quits and playing in the industry leagues. But he came back. We were down in Florida in his backyard, and he couldn't resist an opportunity to draft with us. And he came back for the NL. And Ron, developed the Lima plan. And for those who haven't been, students of LABR history and fantasy baseball history, it's called For Low Investment Mound Aces, and it was basically named after Fernando Lima.
Jose Lima?
Jose Lima. Yes, that's who it was. So anyway, and who was a key to that kind of strategy, Jose Lima. And so anyway, those types of strategies you can develop, and LABR was originally kind of that petri dish for people to try out new strategies. I tried one time to punt batting average in LABR, and it failed spectacularly. So, you learn from that. Hopefully, you learn from your mistakes, and you get to where you're, comfortable with doing what you're doing. But that's the fun thing. That Doug Dennis is probably not going to spend a whole lot on pitching when you go in the room. Lenny Melnick was famous for never drafting a closer, but always tossing him out there for everybody else to feed on. And so you get to try out, the different types of strategies, and hopefully figure out what works best for you. But yeah, it's been awfully fun to see the cast of characters that we've had cycle through LABR and trying to spot what they're doing before they completely do it, and then maybe thwart them a little bit. That's kind of fun.
Yeah, that Saturday night after LABR, I mean, that was kind of a whirlwind, because we got kicked out of our banquet hall, and we kind of had to finish up the reserve round like out on the patio area, and then afterwards, we were hanging out and talking about back in the day stuff. That was a ton of fun. getting to drink Coronas with Greg Ambrosius in his final year in the league is certainly
right.
a highlight.
Making all sorts of memories out there, and most definitely.
So, in the NL, I want to talk about which one of your teams you think has the best chance to win from just the NL and AL teams. In the NL, you built your team around Michael Harris at 29, Dansby Swanson 24. You got Scherzer for 30. You paid up a little bit at catcher with Tyler Stevenson, Travis d'Arnaud, and then you kind of spread the rest out. And then in the AL, you built around Semien at 29, Byron Buxton 23, Eloy Jimenez 21. You got Shane Bieber as your ace at 25. Which of those two teams, now that you get the chance to kind of look back, which of those teams do you think has the best chance to win the league?
I think probably the NL, just because I didn't have as much risk as I did in the AL. I thought I was a little bit slow to build, not by design or anything, but just the way that the prices went in that league, especially with Greg Ambrosius and Sean Childs jumping out so quickly in the NL and buying almost 4/5 of their roster in the first hour. I tended to lay back a little bit, and after getting Harris and Dansby Swanson there, and Scherzer too, as you mentioned, I kind of held off and tried to again play that middle. d'Arnaud was really not, if I had a regret or something that I might not have really been on board with after the fact, it was going after I'd gotten Stevenson, going after d'Arnaud and getting that second catcher. I really had trouble filling my second base spot, and to have some of that money left over to be able to get, a Jonathan India or somebody like that, I think would have made this team even stronger. That said, number one, it's a team that's fairly healthy and has a fairly good track record of staying healthy, especially the hitters. So I feel like I'm fairly balanced there. And then on the pitching side, getting Scherzer, Joe Musgrove at 15 may be the key, depending on how quickly he can come back from that broken toe. It's still kind of early in spring, and I know that we tend to, as fantasy analysts and fantasy drafters, overreact to every single bit of news that we see because it's all that we have. And we like to add, as much as we know, we like to feel like we have all the information or as much information as possible and factor all of that in. And if he's going to be out, maybe for a month or 6 weeks, he's still going to be back, in April sometime, maybe toward the end of April. I possibly will be able to get 5/6 of the season, and that's pretty good for that price. So I think the NL team was a little bit more balanced. I was able to, I had a hole there in the middle for a while, but then the bargains become a little bit more prevalent toward the end game. And I think I was one of those that did have a little bit of money toward the end that I was able to spend, hopefully well, in getting, guys like Jesse Winker that I mentioned for 14, and Harper, Brandon Nimmo was an $18 buy, but I'm okay with that. And guys like that, Sean Manaea for 9, kind of like that a little bit. In the AL, a little bit more risk. I had, obviously, when you have Mondesi and Buxton, you're going to have an awful lot of hope as your key element. But otherwise, I think that's a pretty solid team, except for the speed that I have.
Yeah, I mean, to your NL team, I thought Camilo Doval for 13 was a really nice price compared to the other closer prices, both in the NL and the AL. There were guys Bautista was a great price for you in the AL on the closer side of things too, but I think closers went for more, at least in the AL, than I remember them going for last year. I think I might have been the person who, I don't think I threw out Emmanuel Clase, but I at one point had him at 21, and then he goes for, I think he went for like 25. And I don't think that's a bad price or anything, but I was just surprised because last year I think he went for like 19 or 20. So I think getting Doval at 13 and even getting Dylan Floro for 5, I think that's a nice kind of start to kind of finishing top third in saves, I would think, in that league.
Yeah, I was really happy with that because I had Doval for a couple of dollars more, and we had 4 closers in the NL go for more than $20, which had not happened in LABR NL. I went and looked this up. It had not happened in LABR NL since 2007 when we had 4 $20 closers. So that was kind of surprising, and people really wanted to lock down those saves. And I understand that. I mean, it makes sense with so many bullpens going to the closer by committee. It makes those guys that much more valuable. So I get it. But if those people, get your $20 closer, you're probably not going to be in on a closer in the teens. And that's where I was able to bargain hunt a little bit in both leagues.
Yeah. So maybe you could say I buried the lead, but we were both there for the Jordan Walker show on Saturday. He ended up going for $16 to Greg and Sean the night before, but I was kind of lamenting that it would have been great if AL had gone first and then NL had gone second, so that we could sort of see what Walker would have gone for, because not only did he go 4 for 4 with 920 feet worth of home runs and a double, and he was just wearing out that left center alley. But he did so in front of, I don't know, 24 fantasy analysts, 30 fantasy analysts.
At least, yes. I mean, it was included. Tickets to the game was included as part of the package for first pitch. So there were nothing scheduled, no sessions scheduled. It was, let's go watch baseball. Beautiful day. And you couldn't turn that down, and especially the chance to see Jordan Walker. And he played the whole game because the Cardinals traveled, so you got to see him get 4 at bats. And it was. I'll tell you, James, I don't get to see as many spring training games as I used to. Used to be able to go for a week in Arizona, a week in Florida, and do all sorts of reporting and everything else. But for all of the games that I've seen that I can recall, I don't think anybody has been more impressive in one single game at spring training than Jordan Walker was. I mean, everything was hit on a line. It was hit hard. And, the 2 home runs that he hit, both of them were on 2 strike counts too. So, I mean, just process that. And as you said, if we had the NL draft that night instead of the night before, I mean, we could have seen him, and I think you'll definitely see this once the new ADP numbers, revised ADP numbers start coming out. He's going to be up there, top 200 overall, maybe top 150 overall, just because. I mean, are you gonna keep Jordan Walker off of this team? Are you going to keep him out of the starting lineup? I don't know that the Cardinals are going to be able to do that. He's just playing his way onto the roster.
Well, yeah, and this, it's so funny. The first home run he hit, we're there sitting with like probably, I don't know, there were probably 20 people just right around me that I'm having conversations with. Mm-hmm. But Jordan Walker comes up and I'm like, look, I'm focusing on this at bat. I'm not turning.
Don't talk to me. That's right.
But then someone was trying to get to their seat, and so I had to get up and let someone walk past me and get to their seat, and he hits the home run as I'm standing up to let this person walk past me. But thankfully, I look over and there's Eric Cross and Jesse Roach both have their cameras out, and they're sort of, quickly trying to type out a tweet. And then I go and search Jordan Walker on Twitter, and Jeff Ponce, who is sitting behind the plate, he's already got the video of the home run up. So, there wasn't instant replay in that ballpark, but there was instant replay on Twitter from all the people that were at the park.
And, I think that's just Jordan Walker being, considerate of us, that when he came back up,
right.
In his last at bat, that he showed exactly, when we had a nice, good view of it, unobstructed. he put one out, over the concession stand.
Yeah, I mean,
it's just like
in baseball. Thank you, Jordan Walker, for being so reliable, because everyone had their cameras out then for the rest of his at bats, right. And he didn't disappoint from there on out.
It's funny. I'll just throw this out. When you talk about being able to have a history of LABR and times that we've been to the fall league and seen the Fall Stars game and some of the games out there with some of the top prospects, one of the things that the veterans like to talk about was, remember that time when we saw the Cardinals when they had that guy named Albert Pujols that wasn't expected to make the team but was really impressive in the fall league? Yeah, it was great. I think that may be our Pujols moment, is watching Jordan Walker in spring training at first pitch.
So of course we had Derek Carty then on Sunday morning, who I believe you mentioned Saturday night has the highest winning percentage in LABR history. I think you have the most total wins, but Derek Carty, I think you said, has the highest winning percentage in LABR. And of course he was trying to pour cold water on the whole thing, just kind of mentioning, bias and just being realistic about projecting rookies. So do you think this is a case where, you mentioned the ADP and how much he's going to climb? Do you think this is going to be a scenario where he's just overpriced going forward because of this spring, or was it so impressive that you kind of want to get a piece of the action?
I'll tell you, I probably will want to get a piece of the action somewhere just in case. I mean, it's impossible, for him to live up to the standard that he set in front of us, in that one spring training game. So yeah, I think his value was already on the way up when he had a home run in his first spring training game. So, I mean, this wasn't even the beginning of the Jordan Walker hype volcano, but I think inevitably you're going to see him fail at some point this season. I mean, it's really hard, and Julio Rodriguez did it last year, to jump from AA to the major leagues, at age 20. But, even Julio Rodriguez had some slow points last season, had some slumps, had some issues, and the learning curve was there. Still an extremely valuable fantasy player, but I think the same sort of thing we have to kind of take with a grain of salt. I don't know that I'm as down as, or maybe as ultra realistic as Derek is, because I like to kind of go along for the ride. I like to dream on these young guys. And so, yeah, maybe I'll try not to be overly aggressive. I did that when Jose Abreu came up. I remember feeling like that people weren't giving him enough credit, and we didn't really see, this kind of performance in spring training. But I was on Jose Abreu in practically every league I could get him in, and it worked out for me. I think now we're a lot smarter, we're a lot savvier, and those opportunities, you're going to have to pay a lot more or draft Jordan Walker a lot higher than maybe you would have 5 or 10 years ago, just because everybody's aware of him. And that's still, I think I'll try and at least get some of the action somewhere in one of my leagues.
Yeah, and the way this is going to work is people are going to go into their drafts tonight, tomorrow. They're going to be like, I'm taking Jordan Walker in the 10th round, and someone else is going to take him in the 9th round. And so the next time they're in a draft, they're going to be like, all right, I'm taking him in the 9th round. And then someone in that draft is going to take him in the 8th round. And then you're just, the ADP is just going to get to a pretty crazy place here, I think, before opening day.
You know what was interesting? One more thing. The next day after Jordan Walker's home run display, we had the mixed LABR draft, and he only went for 12 in that particular auction. So I wonder if this was after Derek kind of had his little session there and talked about it. I wonder if maybe Derek brought a few of those folks in that room back to reality, or if maybe that's all it takes is just, a chance to breathe and then put it into context. And the mixed league versus, NL only, also there's a different dynamic there too. But the replacement value is, you know, a lot higher in a mixed league, so you can afford to kind of take a chance.
Yeah, and I thought I thought for 16 on the NL side, it's, you know, NL only, I think, is in even better place to maybe go after someone like Walker, because even, you know, him getting sent to AAA for a few weeks isn't the end of the world there, because you can reserve him, and then there is that really high upside, and he will be adding outfield eligibility here soon enough.
It's a great point. Great point.
All right, so this is a nice transition. I usually in this spot, I have a guest and I will go through some people in a round of ADP, and we'll give some targets and some fades. But Jordan Walker, I think, is a good reminder that this is a good time of year to kind of throw ADP out the window. You know, I think it's still useful, I guess, and you definitely want to be narrowing sort of the window of when you're looking at the ADP from. But you know, March is where people are really kind of getting their guys where they have them valued. No one's really playing that game with ADP as much as they were earlier in the offseason. So we're going to scrap that segment. And Steve, since you're one of only a handful of people in the industry who, like me, has been to several Phish shows,
Yes.
I want to close out with some Phish quick hitters for you. All right. So how do you remember sort of how you kind of first started going to Phish shows, or like sort of how you discovered them, or when what year that might have been?
I will tell you, I was at a fantasy sports conference in San Francisco, and I ran into one Howard Bender.
Yeah.
And I had just started bopping around on my satellite radio, and had come onto the Jam Band channel, and had just sort of familiar in passing with Phish, but I kind of liked what I heard, and ran into a notorious Phish head in Bender at this conference, and we just started talking, and we hit it off wonderfully. He said, "Hey man, I've got a couple shows on disc, and I can send them to you," and all of this. And so we struck up a friendship over fantasy baseball and Phish, and the shows he sent me were fantastic. And from pretty much that moment on, I was like, I need to listen to more of these guys, and I need to go see some shows. So I think I saw my first show. I missed the 1.0 and the 2.0 eras, and came in probably around 2013. I saw my first show, and have tried to, if at all possible, get to at least one somewhere every year since then.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think we've got a sort of similar time frame, I guess. I think I probably went to my first show in like 2009, maybe, kind of right when they got back together. So yeah, and Bender, of course, is probably the most famous fantasy analyst or just famous Phish fan among fantasy analysts. And
Right.
I know Eno's been to some Phish shows, but there aren't many of us. So I had to talk some Phish with you here at the end. Do you know how many shows you've been to total?
I have the count is 15 at the moment. So I'm not somebody who can get up and travel. Generally during the summer there's baseball that's going on, and so I don't get a chance to go everywhere. But like I said, I've tried to kind of hit one or two if they come near me every year, and I kind of held up my end of the bargain there.
I think you've got me beat. I think I've only been to a dozen.
Okay.
Only a dozen. But you're in kind of a better part of the country, I think.
Yes.
East Coast, they're going to be playing a ton of shows near you most summers. So that's a good part of the country if you want to keep seeing them every summer. For me, it's pretty much, I either go to Alpine Valley here in Wisconsin, which is really, really annoying to get to. get to and from, or I have to really get mobile. I've seen them at Wrigley, but yeah, I mean, it's not the best part of the country if I want to just make sure I'm seeing Phish every summer. Do you have a favorite Phish show you've been to?
There are many. I have to say, again, I was able to hook up with Howard Bender. God love him. And we caught the entire postponed New Year's run last April in New York City. So we saw all four of those shows, and the New Year's Eve show with the whales floating through Madison Square Garden and dolphins and everything was just mind-blowing. So that has to be one of them. I think that's tops on the list. In terms of the musical selections, I saw them at Blossom in Ohio, and that was just a fantastic show. And I actually caught one on the way back from First Pitch, Arizona one year. I had a layover in Las Vegas, and they were playing there, and Howard Bender was at that show. We were way far apart, but I bought a single ticket, just walked and meandered through the MGM Grand and found a single and went to that show, and then came home from the Arizona Fall League. So that was kind of memorable just for all that I had to do to get to that show. But yeah, I have my Phish t-shirt on. Provided that just for you.
Perfect. Love it. Have you my favorite that I've been to is the Super Bowl 9, which was up in Watkins Glen in 2011. So that was me and my best friend since first grade hopped in his Jeep Wrangler and drove from Wisconsin to Watkins Glen.
That's fantastic.
And spent the whole weekend because they're going to do they'll do a daytime set. I think that one of them was like an acoustic daytime set, and then they do the normal set encore. But the highlight of that weekend was they did this secret set Saturday night, and a lot of people were kind of walking back to their campsites, and then all of a sudden there's music playing sort of back towards kind of the stage area. So everyone goes rushing back out there, and they're playing this set.
It's like in the middle of the night almost, right?
Yeah, it was in the middle of the night. It was about an hour long. It was just incredibly memorable. So that's one that'd probably be tough to beat for me, especially just kind of given the time in my life when that was just, early 20s. What's do you got a favorite Phish song?
Oh dear.
To have them to see live, favorite song to see live.
I'll tell you, I got my first fluff head this New Year's run in April. So that was very memorable. But there are so many. Obviously, you get your Tweezers, your Chalk Dust, a Mike song, Harry Hood. There so many of it. It's funny. We had once upon a time, Howard and a couple other guys in the media industry. We actually had a Phish song draft that we did, and it was a snake draft, and it was really fun because Tweezer was the first overall pick, and then as we went through the snake and everything, we came back to the team that had the first pick. The last pick was Tweezer reprise, and
Perfect.
so it just seemed like all was right in the world.
Yeah, I would probably have to go with Harry Hood for me, but yeah, I mean, honestly, Tweezer reprise is one of my favorites as well.
Yes. The great thing is on some of the Fox broadcasts of Super Bowl or whatever, Jake Jolly has his controls on the music, and you can listen real hard and say, hey, oh, there's a Phish song. There's another Phish song going in and out of the commercials and everything. That's a fun little sport.
I've definitely noticed that. I didn't know who was behind it. I've known for about a decade that somebody behind the scenes there is a big jam band fan. That's funny.
It is.
Okay, so last question related to Phish. Have you checked out or heard of the band Goose yet? They're sort of my new favorite jam band right now, and I feel like they're kind of picking up where sort of Phish left off, I guess.
Yep. I have not seen a show, but I have some relatives that are really into Goose and follow them around and have seen multiple shows. So I've heard all the talk, and I saw, when Trey Anastasio sat in with Goose, when was that, last summer or something like that?
Well, he sat in with them at Radio City Music Hall in the summer, but then they also did I think an 8-show tour down the East Coast where it was Trey Anastasio band and Goose for 8 shows.
Yeah. So and I saw some video of that, which was just fantastic. So I'm definitely receptive and looking forward to listening more.
All right. Well,
I'm a jam band fan anyway. There's so many. I mean, I love Humphreys McGee, Disco Biscuits, and that sort of genre. So ready to jump in at any point.
Nice. I'm going to see my first Goose show live in about a month here. They're coming to Madison, so I gotta jump on that because they're probably going to be too big for Madison fairly soon. Phish isn't coming to Madison anytime soon.
No. I'm still trying to figure out how to get a piece of summer tour this year.
All right, Steve. Well, this has just been great. Really appreciate you taking the time. Do you want to let people know, like, you got any more labor recap stuff in the hopper or anything like that, or anything they should be on the lookout for?
We're going to have the big thing, I think, is the Sports Weekly Fantasy Extra issue, which is coming out on March 15th. We affectionately refer to it as the Leviathan because it has all of the recaps of AL labor, NL labor, and mixed labor, along with our fantasy rankings and everything. It's our big preseason blowout. So look for that on newsstands. We're putting out some of that content. I just posted my NL wrap up for labor yesterday, and we'll look forward to the AL coming either tonight or tomorrow. So you can check that out at usatoday.com. And you can find me on Twitter at Steve A. Gardner. And I'm there all the time.
Well, I can't thank you enough for coming on, and I also can't thank you enough for having me in AL labor. It's really an honor. I definitely, when I was first breaking into the industry, I remember listening to you with Brett Sayre and Mike Gianella recapping these auctions and just thinking how cool they were. So it's really really an honor to be a part of the fun now for 2 years here.
Absolutely. You're a great addition to the league, and I appreciate everything that you're doing for the industry, and you really held your own, I think, in this year's draft too.
Well, we'll see. But thanks again, Steve.
Whether you stayed true to your values or whatever, doesn't matter.
Yeah, I mean, I might have got $1 extra on Jose Altuve, and I probably could have been pushed a little bit on Robbie Ray if people had been looking up at that roster chart and seeing how desperate I was for his Ks. All right. Well, this has been the RotoWire Fantasy Baseball Podcast brought to you by Underdog and Fantrax.